Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky accuses Russia of being contaminated with hatred after anti-Israel protesters stormed Dagestan airport in Russia. Putin returns blame. Plus, the U.S. says last planned Israel charter flight leaves Tuesday. Welcome to the program. A very good morning to you. Also coming up today, the United Nations pushes to open the Kerem Shalom crossing to deliver aid to Gaza. But first, Israel's military has intensified ground assault and claimed to have struck more than 600 militant targets in recent days in Gaza, where Palestinian civilians are in dire need of fuel, food, and clean water. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refused to cease hostilities with Hamas and says the army will press on with its plans to wipe out the group. Military specialists believe Israeli forces are moving slowly in their ground offensive, in part to keep open the possibility that Hamas terrorists will negotiate the release of the hostages they are holding. The Israeli army released footage of what it says are airstrikes that targeted Hezbollah's infrastructure in Lebanon. According to the military in a Telegram post, Israeli fighter jets struck Hezbollah terror infrastructure in Lebanon, including weapons, posts, and sites used by Hezbollah. Lebanon's Hezbollah have been exchanging fire with Israeli forces across the border since its Palestinian ally Hamas in Gaza and Israel went to war on October the 7th. The violence on the front line between Israel and Lebanon has been the deadliest escalation since Hezbollah and the Israeli military fought a major war in 2006. The head of the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, the UNRWA, Felipe Lazzarini, warns that the UN Security Council, warning them that the Palestinians are besieged on the Gaza Strip and they are being subjected to forced displacement and collective punishment. The Commissioner General also says a communication blackout over the weekend had accelerated the breakdown of civil order and warned that if that breakdown worsens, it'll make things extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the United Nations to continue operating in Gaza.
Perils the lives of civilians, UN personnel, and humanitarian workers.
And more than one entry point into Gaza is indispensable if we are to make a difference. Kerem Shalom between Israel and Gaza is the only crossing equipped to rapidly process a sufficiently large number of trucks.
They want to depopulate the Gaza Strip completely from the entire population and throw them in the lap of Egypt in the Sinai Desert. No one should justify our killing or find reasons to give more time to the killer. Call for an end of this assault on an entire nation. Stop the killings in the West Bank by settlers and occupation forces and the forced displacement underway there.
The world is watching the rise of a Shia Islamist Reich. Yet, just like the rise of Nazism, the world is silent. This meeting is only about the situation in the Middle East and the Iranian threat. This has nothing to do with the Palestinians. Some member states have learned nothing in the past 80 years. Some of you have forgotten why this body was established. So I will remind you, from this day on, each time you look at me, you will remember what staying silent in the face of evil means. Just like my grandparents and the grandparents of millions of Jews, from now on, my team and I will wear yellow stars. We will wear this star until you condemn the atrocities of Hamas and demand the immediate release of our hostages.
Mr. President.
The United States is seeking to boost the delivery of humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip to assist besieged Palestinians. Now, that's according to the White House National Security Council spokesman, Mr. John Kirby. Mr. Kirby says while aid has been increased, the volume needs to be increased significantly.
We continue to closely monitor events in the Middle East and the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Of course, the president remains continually briefed, was briefed throughout the weekend, and of course, again this morning. And as I think you know, he spent some time yesterday on the phone with Prime Minister Netanyahu and with President Sisi of Egypt. In the call with Prime Minister Netanyahu did receive a commitment that the Israelis will endeavor to support a significant increase in the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza, so additional trucks. And we had 45 or so get in yesterday. We're hoping that we can get some more in today, but obviously, even with the increase, it's going to take time to make up the difference. And we know there's an awful lot that needs to happen to accelerate and to increase that flow of aid.
Now, a breakdown in civil order has put 4 UN aid distribution centers and a storage facility out of action in Gaza as people search desperately for food and water. That's according to the director of the UNWRA Affairs in Gaza, Mr. Tom White, who also says that a logistics base at the Rafah border crossing vital to aid distribution had become increasingly difficult to operate because 8,000 people are sheltering there.
It's a disaster on top of a disaster. Health needs are soaring, and our ability to meet those needs is rapidly declining. So a third of hospitals are non-functioning. 71% of clinics are non-functioning. You've seen the numbers of 8,000 deaths, over 20,000 injuries, 1.4 million people displaced. So our inability to supply medicines and equipment to the remaining hospitals is vital, and now we've been cut off from that ability, if you like, because of the high security risk in the north. Before the conflict, Gaza was one of the most densely populated places on the planet. Now a large proportion, 1.4 million people, have now displaced out of 2.2 million. And they have been crammed further and further into smaller and smaller areas. You can't imagine what the conditions are like in those collective centres or in the homes of people who've been generous enough to have other families come and stay with them. The sanitation is atrocious. I mean, I was just talking to an UNRWA colleague. She said the living conditions are subhuman. Where do people go to the bathroom? How do you remove the waste?
Now, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says anti-Jewish unrest in Russia showed that Moscow's moral foundation has become so contaminated by hatred that it is no longer capable of scoring a strategic victory. President Zelensky says the storming on Sunday of an airport in southern Russia by protesters looking for Jewish passengers was the second time this year Moscow had lost control over events after an abortive uprising by Russian mercenaries in June. Aviation authorities closed the airport for a time in Makhachkala after crowds poured into the runways in search of passengers arriving from Israel. The rioters were waving Palestinian flags, breaking down glass doors, and running through the airport. Conversely, Russian President Vladimir Putin is accusing Western and intelligence services, as well as Ukraine, for being amongst those who instigated the storming of the airport in the capital of the southern Russian region of Dagestan by an anti-Israeli mob on Sunday. President Putin made his remarks at a televised statement to a meeting of members of Russia's Security Council and the government and the heads of law enforcement agencies. Russia's Interior Ministry affirms that 60 people have been arrested after hundreds of anti-Israel protesters stormed the airport shortly after a plane from Israel arrived. Now, joining us now is His Excellency, Mr. Abdullahi Shawesh, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Embassy of the State of Palestine. The good ambassador will be joining us in the course of the program. First, we'd like to speak to Mr. DPA Thomas, who joins us from here in Lagos, at the University of Lagos, Lagos State University, I beg your pardon, an expert on international relations theory. Good morning and welcome to the program. Dr. Thomas, I almost made you an ambassador.
Good morning, Olumide. How are you?
It will not be far removed from your capabilities, sir. Thank you for being with us.
Amen. Thank you.
So, okay, so let's begin now with the Palestinian ordeal in Gaza. We understand that 24 aid trucks now have been added to the initial 14 that have been able to gain access into the Gaza Strip to try and ameliorate the suffering of the Gazans there, but still described as a drop in the ocean.
Well, I actually sympathize with the Gazans, and like every other person, I appeal to Israel to actually create a kind of humanitarian corridor where all these aids will be can be safely delivered and distributed appropriately to those that are actually in need. I know very well that there will be other logistics or other problems emerging or that are going to erupt as a result of their own desperation to ensure that Hamas does not capitalize on this humanitarian gesture to appropriate what is meant for the citizens. And you know, the two competing countries, or let me say the two competing militaries, they are actually desperate, because Hamas will be desperate for some of these things too. You know, they too also have to have means of, they have to have access to food and other medical aids and all sorts of things. And they don't care whether these things get to the civilians and everything. And US will also listen to will also succumb to pressure from the international community by allowing all these things, all these military, all these aids to get into Gaza. However, when a nation is fighting a desperate war of survival, it's always very difficult to appeal to their sensibilities. And that's why I think Netanyahu is talking about no ceasefire at this moment. And nobody is emphasizing, nobody in Israel is talking more on the humanitarian corridor that is being appealed for, or in terms of the delivery of all these deliverables. The situation is, sometimes some of these contradictions in the system would have, when you create double standard, it will also create problem later in the course of events. Because this humanitarian gesture, this humanitarian appeal has never been given or done in the case of Ukraine. I am sorry, I hear less of UN interventions in Ukraine. Now I'm hearing more of humanitarian gesture or UN appeal for or humanitarian deliverables in Gaza. The emphasis should, if UN wants everybody to see this as part of its own fundamental role in creating peace in global system, then the same should have been applied to Ukraine. And if that has been done, then there will be opportunity. There will be no way for anybody to say that, look, you did this in Ukraine. Now, why don't you want to do this? So, but now we are appealing to Russia. I mean, we are appealing to Israel to create this corridor. And then we are saying at the same time that those who have been affected in Ukraine are also children, and there are also women, elderly people there and everything. So let there be a balance. There should be no double standard. There should be no mounting of pressure from one side, and then should be no less pressure for the other side. So that's the way I see it. But definitely, it's always very difficult to achieve this kind of humanitarian appeasement or humanitarian appeal when you are fighting a desperate war of survival.
Brings the United Nations under the microscope of global scrutiny. As you've mentioned, the war between Russia and Ukraine, now the war between Israel and Hamas. And you've mentioned double standards. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres was accused of being partisan and being partial, and even his resignation was called for by the Israeli authorities because of the way he framed his response to the appeal for Israel to stop the attacks that were causing a humanitarian problem in Gaza, and the way he framed the situation concerning the emergence of this conflict in the first place. So do you see the United Nations as not living up to its responsibility? We've heard from the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations saying that they've lost track of the very purpose for which the United Nations was established.
Yes. The flurry of activities by the United Nations in Gaza now is so confounding, because I have not seen humanitarian, I have not seen its presence, massive presence like this in Ukraine. So at a particular point in time, you will be wondering that, do we have this? I mean, why should these people be denied this humanitarian aid? And why should some other people now be clamoring for it? It's not balanced. It's not balanced. Definitely, it's not balanced. And I want to support. I want to go along with Israel that the double standard and the kind of partisanship shown by Guterres in this particular war is shocking. It's shocking. It may not be his fault. It may not be his fault because the system itself has its own systemic contradictions. But it is his fault in terms of operational participation. The operational mobilization should be at the par, should be seen not to be subjective. I mean, not to be lopsided. If it is seen like this, it's going to be very difficult for you to convince one and say, oh, okay, this is where did you set the standard? Where did you set the precedent? The precedent has to be set. If a precedent has been set in Ukraine, then there will be no need for anybody to be talking about UN being partial now. But they are being partial because, I mean, just look at it, Olumide, since you have been discussing the Ukraine-Russian war. Have you seen this kind of this level of massive activities by the United Nations when it comes to humanitarian gesture? These children have been killed there. Children have been killed. In fact, in any case, most of the targets, almost 80%, 70 to 80% of the targets of Russia had been civilian infrastructure, had been civilian buildings. Israel is saying that, look, 70%, 80% of their own targets have been military infrastructure. But in Ukraine, you see 80%, 70%, 80% of civilian infrastructure. Where was the UN then? And where is the UN today? Even in the United Nations, even as we are speaking. It's not good. It's not good. See, the system itself has its own contradictions, and now it's going to be compounded if you now do this kind of double standard. If you approach it with this kind of double standard in two walls, whether they are different in terms of their operations, whether they are different in terms of the objectives, it's a different thing entirely. But what is important is that Israel is invading Gaza. Russia invaded Ukraine. So it's the same thing. We are talking about invasion here.
Indeed, we had
invasion to revenge.
We had one of the experts.
Israel is invading to revenge a mini Holocaust. Russia is invading to occupy another country, a sovereign nation. So that one is even more serious. And then you are targeting civilian infrastructure, and nobody is talking. The United Nations is not talking. Why is it so active now? When he visited Ukraine, he only visited to go and solidarize with Zelensky. He did not say anything about humanitarian gesture. Are children not being killed in the Ukraine? It's unfair.
Indeed, we had reports that children were being killed, and some of the atrocities that Israel have accused the Hamas terrorists of doing. Some of it was happening between Russia and Ukraine as well. But let's look at the situation in Gaza and why there's a lot of emotive reaction to it, because of the scale of the proportion of the deaths of civilians in Gaza. According to the Health Ministry of Gaza, run by Hamas, 8,000, at least 8,000 people now, almost 8,000 people now have lost their lives, many of whom were children. It is also reported that hospitals and places, neighborhoods have had the sort of collateral damage that they shouldn't have at this time. And in the midst of that, the displacement of the Palestinians from the north to the south is causing too much of a humanitarian catastrophe. That these are the reasons why a humanitarian pause should be called for on the part of Israel.
Now, the major problem, if we look at it critically and holistically, the major problem is that for as long as the world continues to tolerate terrorist organizations to run governments at structural level, you know, it's going to be very difficult. If you have a terrorist, if you have organizations that have been tagged terrorist, or if you have this kind of fundamentalist in power, as you have the Taliban in Afghanistan, as you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, as you have Hamas in Gaza, as you have, well, the Ayatollah kind of Islam in Iran, there will be problem, because terrorists do not abide by the norms and conventions. They have their own ethos, they have their own creed, they operate differently. So for as long as you keep having this kind of scenarios, we will continue to have problems, because some will be working at the conventional level, others will be working at the unorthodox level. So the way Israel should approach this thing, the way I feel, is I will align myself with the United States now. Yes, as much as they are desperate to avenge the mini Holocaust, as they have put it, or the October 7 Holocaust, as I would want to say that 8,000 being lost in less than, it's not even up to a month, and then you are losing 8,000 civilians, and that's on the high side. That's on the high side. Yes, you will. One, we are talking about proportionality here, and two, we are talking about collateral damage here. As long as proportionality is always very difficult to attain or to achieve, at the same time, we are not looking at a situation where in 3 weeks of war, you have had about 8,000 collateral damage, 8,000 civilians casualties in terms of collateral damage. So by the time the war ends, what will happen? Is very, and that's why Biden feels concerned about it. That look, create a safe situation for the civilians. And I understand, from the various reports you have had, that there is no safe place in Gaza. I think this is unfair. That is not good at all. It's not good in any way. There must be a way where these children will be. There is nobody that will see these children being tortured this way or going through this kind of scenarios, and would not pity humanity. I would not pity the children as so to speak. It's unfair. So Israel should find a way around this. It is not in their interest to have 8,000 casualties in 3 weeks. In a way, I think what they should do, the two countries, they have seen that they are fighting existential war. So there is none of them that will live for the other. The Israelis cannot claim the land of the Hamas now. Hamas cannot claim the land of Israel. So what they should do is what I will call complicated cooperation or complicated collaboration. The two of them must devise means or mechanisms by which they can be cantankerous, they can have misunderstandings, they can have everything, but nothing should be near what happened on October 7th by both sides.
Okay, we'll have to let you go for now.
You should not attack.
Dr. Thomas, we'll have to let you go.
You should not attack.
Indeed, we have to let you go. It'll be remiss of me not to mention the case of an Israeli, 23-year-old German-Israeli lady who's been found to have been dead after there was sentiments and hope that she will be found alive. She was one of the first people, Stani Luke, that was driven through the streets of Gaza on a flatbed truck, where she was
you can see, you can imagine that kind of
indecently paraded, and it was one on the videos that was uploaded to the internet by Hamas. It was one of the first videos that people around the world saw of this 23-year-old. Her mother had been crying to the German authorities, to the Israeli authorities, and to the Hamas for the release of her daughter, hoping that she was still alive. But we understand that yesterday the Israeli Foreign Ministry found that they found her, that she died, and that she endured unspeakable horrors, and they prayed for the repose of her soul. That's just one of the incredible heartbreak and misery and terror and horror that is being experienced by the Israelis and by the Palestinians now in Gaza in this intractable circumstance. We thank you, Dr. DPA Thomas, expert on international relations theory, Lagos State University, who joined us today. Many thanks.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you,
Still ahead, U.S. officials, Jewish leaders meet to address anti-Semitism on campus. Please stay with us. Welcome to the second half of our coverage today of Israel-Hamas war. A close friend of a hostage named Helena Trupanov, Shiri Grosbaro, was glad after watching the video released by Hamas, wearing a T-shirt with images of the Tropanov family. Grosbard said she knew her friend is alive and looks physically well, accusing Prime Minister Netanyahu of failing to protect Israeli citizens during the deadly Hamas attack and failing to get them back home. She called for an agreement to secure their release in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. According to Israeli authorities, at least 239 hostages, both Israeli and foreign, were taken captive by Hamas. The United States Department is planning a last charter flight today to help Americans depart Israel from Tel Aviv. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller told media that the decision responds to a decline in demand for such flights. A plane departed from Israel on Sunday carrying only 5 people.
The number of seats that we have consistently seen the demand for our charter flights go down where we had a lot of flights going out with 50% capability. I think the number of seats that we have offered, we've had something like 25% of them actually be filled. So there continue to be ways to leave Israel commercially. We've offered a number of ways over the past few weeks to leave through our charter flights. We have notified everyone that the charter flight tomorrow is the last one that we are currently planning. So if they do want to leave, now's the time to do it. Don't wait for another flight. But we will always conduct assessments in real time about whether there's additional demand, whether circumstances change on the ground, and if we need to make additional arrangements.
The The United States State Department is informing the public that Hamas is making a number of demands before it will allow people to leave Gaza. He was speaking of safe passage for American citizens in Gaza who want to leave, and also securing the release of hostages held by Hamas. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said American citizens and other foreign nationals were being held inside the Strip against their will because Hamas won't uphold its responsibility to operate its side of the Rafah crossing.
Just as we believe they ought to release, it is the subject of ongoing conversations. It was the subject of the Secretary's call with the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister of Qatar earlier today. Hamas is making a number of demands before they'll allow people to leave Gaza. I'm not going to speak to those demands, but it's something we're continuing to try to work through. Just as we believe they ought to release all the hostages they are holding, we believe they ought to release or let leave all the American citizens and other foreign nationals who are being basically forced to remain in Gaza against their will because Hamas won't uphold its responsibility to operate its side of the Rafah crossing to allow people to move through the crossing into Egypt. And with that, today I'll wrap it. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Our President Biden's administration's officials are voicing alarm at data showing a rise in anti-Jewish incidents at U.S. universities and plan to meet Jewish leaders to discuss steps to counter the surge. Tensions between pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian groups have sprung up on some U.S. campuses, including several in New York, prompting university officials to tighten security. The Anti-Defamation League last week reported a nearly 400% spike in its anti-Semitic incidents overall since the October 7 Hamas attack on Israel. Of the 312 incidents between October the 7th to the 23rd, about 190 were linked to the Israel-Hamas war.
We have seen an alarming rise in reported... Since the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks in Israel, we have seen an alarming rise in reported anti-Semitic incidents at schools and on college campuses. There's no place for hate in America, and we condemn any anti-Semitic threat or incident in the strongest terms. We're also closely monitoring and concerned by the reports of anti-Semitic threats at Cornell University. To the students at Cornell and on campuses across the country, we're tracking these threats closely. We're thinking of you, and we're going to do everything we can on both at Cornell and across the country to counter terrorism, anti-Semitism. Today we announced that the Biden-Harris administration is taking multiple actions to address this alarming rise. President Biden has been clear. We can't stand by and stand silent in the face of hate. We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism. We must also, without equivocation, denounce Islamophobia.
And Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is explaining that only the country's military and security forces have the legal rights to use force in the occupied West Bank amidst a spree of violence by extremist Jewish settlers, including the killing and displacement of several Palestinians in that territory. Mr. Gallant was speaking at a news conference about ongoing Israeli military operations against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Israel said its security forces are trying to arrest and kill Palestinian fighters from the Hamas and Islamic Jihad groups, but Palestinians have reported vigilante violence by some Jewish settlers who lived in the territory Israel captured in the 1967 war. And now we speak to a Palestinian ambassador to Nigeria, Ambassador Abdallah Shawish. Ambassador Shawish is speaking to us. He's the Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Embassy of the State of Palestine. Ambassador Shawish is coming to us virtually from Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for hosting.
It's obviously with a very heavy heart, knowing that Palestine has suffered incredible casualties. The latest reports that we have from the health ministry in Gaza, 8,000 civilians killed, is mind-boggling. That's as much as more than population of some villages, or as much as some cities around the world. And all of this is happening in this very short period of time. It's incredible to wrap one's mind around the suffering that is going on in the Gaza Strip. Could we begin by you telling us what the position of the state of Palestine is on the humanitarian situation in Gaza at the moment?
Thank you so much again for hosting me. Indeed, before I start with the humanitarian, because it's very important to shed light about the political issue, because your report, which lucky that I attended very early to hear it. When it came to the report that you mentioned, it's a heavy political report, heavy military report. Then you're asking me to talk about only the humanitarian issue, which is just to corner the Palestinian cause and what is happening right now in Palestine on the humanitarian cause, then to leave the essence of the issue. The humanitarian cause can be finished in 1 minute or we can finish it if we stop this frenzy war, or the Israeli, which is fully supported by the Western country. This frenzy war is the cause of the humanitarian issue. But again, it's unfair to start just by the humanitarian issue while leaving the essence of the root, the cause of what is happening, the massacres that is currently running in Palestine. Indeed, again, we in the Palestinian and the PLO itself, and here, everywhere around the world, would like to shed light about the essence of this issue, not only the humanitarian. The humanitarian, could you imagine that someone is losing his whole entire families, approximately 370 families, completely wiped out from the population register. This is a tragedy, but by the end of the day, this cannot be solved with some milk and some humanitarian aids. This is indeed something that we cannot accept the discussion to start by if we are just seeking or begging a humanitarian aid. What we need as a Palestinian right now, what we need as a human being, not only the Palestinian whom is suffering, the whole entire world is affected by this crisis or by the Israeli frenzy war. What we need is a complete and for one time a ceasefire. Then we can talk about the humanitarian aid. The humanitarian aid is very important, but the issue and the humanitarian aid is there in the around the border in the Egyptian side. Hundreds of trucks is waiting. The question is, will Israel allow this humanitarian aid to enter to Gaza? No. So far, they are saying that anyone is trying to enter, we will, without their permission, they will go to bomb the trucks, so that the humanitarian aid is there. Just the question is there a will from the international community to push or to pressure Israel to allow this humanitarian aid to enter to Gaza? No, it seems no. And the main question should back to the essence of this issue, to the recent escalation, which is again, as Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, rightly put it, it does not come from the vacuum. Will the international community be able and be willing and have the will to put an end to this chronic occupation and to bring the justice for the Palestinian people? This is the main point that we should discuss it today.
Now, very good. I spoke about the humanitarian situation in Gaza because it's front and center with what's happening right now. But let's also take your position on why we should look at the political position of the situation of things concerning Israel and Palestine. And let's begin again now with October the 7th. On October the 7th, Hamas entered into Gaza and slaughtered thousands of people. This is what precipitated the Israeli counterattack, which is happening up to this day. Do the actions of Hamas, does it represent what the wishes of the Palestinian people?
No, the question is, this is the history, again, because wording have a meaning. You mentioned that Hamas attack and slaughtering thousands of people. This is completely not a true narrative, because I appeal to all of you to back just 2 days ago, Haaretz was mentioned in a very important report and investigation that what is Hamas done? This is not 1,000 because the wording have a meaning. Then the history did not start only October 7, just October 6th. Friday, October 6th, 1 day before this escalation, before the recent escalation, Israel killed 7 innocent Palestinians in West Bank. Since the beginning of this year alone, since the beginning of this year, in West Bank and Gaza, Israel killed 152 Palestinians till October 6th. This is the issue. Since October 7th till today, Israel in West Bank, where there is no Hamas and no fighter there, killed approximately 115 Palestinians, innocent Palestinians. Part of them snapped and taped. They snapped just for fun. Please, the history was not started only on October 7. This is the trap that the Israeli and supported by the Western media propaganda want us only to know that the history is started October 7. The history started long time ago. As again, Antonio Guterres mentioned, it was started 56 years ago when they occupied the remaining part of the Palestinian territory. But again, the history started again 75 years ago when they unfortunately succeeded to expel us, the indigenous people, we the Palestinians, the indigenous people, the owner of the historical land of Palestine. They succeeded. The Jewish gang, after 52 massacres, conducted massacres, they succeeded to expel us from our historical land. Then we should start the history. You want to go a bit back in the history. In 1917, when the United Kingdom, the colonial United Kingdom, which have the mandatory power over the historical land of Palestine, issued the notorious declaration which called the Balfour Declaration. In Balfour Declaration, they gifted our historical land. We, the owner, we, the indigenous people, we still have the official document that this land, 94% of the historical land of Palestine between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordanian River belong to us till today in their archive, in the Israeli archive. At that time, 1917, United Kingdom gifted our historical land to the European Jewish. This is the essence of the problem. Stop just tackling the issue as if it is happening from vacuum, as if the history was started just October 7th. Do you know how many Palestinians was killed during this struggle since 1917 till now? Do anyone know how thousands of Palestinians was killed? How many massacres was conducted against the Palestinian people? Please, again, you cannot take it. October 7th out of its historical context. This is not for us, but for fairness, just to be very fair as an analysis, as a political commentator, but again, if you all wanna go and fail in the same trap, Western media trap, who did not stop till today, they did not stop talking about October 7th and the Palestinians conducted or beheaded for Israeli babies, which is not true according to the Israeli. Even Joe Biden, the president of the United States himself, was mentioned and tweeted this. Then the White House retracted it after 2 to 3 hours. So please, again, media is very dangerous, but media can also play a crucial role to put an end to this tragedy between the Palestinian and the Israeli. When the media just stand on the middle, when the media reporting the exact issue, but not to take the reports from the Israeli side. The Israeli side is completely not trustable. And let us remember, 20 years ago, they destroyed Iraq. More than 1 million innocent Iraqi people was killed according to the false narrative of the mass destruction weapons and chemical weapons. Please, again, media, you can play a crucial role to put an end to this tragedy by reporting the issue exactly as it is.
Indeed, Ambassador, we are, on the contrary, we are reporting both sides of the story. We have been, especially since this program on Channels Television aired and is airing, we have been reporting both sides of the story. We are aware, and we do try to broadcast both sides of the story, as well as the historical aspect of the establishment of the Palestinian state and the reason why things are the way they are now. I only said that at the beginning because obviously October 7 is the reason why Israel is attacked Gaza the way they are now in a bid to root out Hamas. But before we continue on that trajectory, Could we talk about what's happening around the world? Palestine has a lot of supporters around the world. There are strong Palestinian communities inside Africa, in South Africa, in Europe. We've seen demonstrations on behalf of the Palestinian Authority all over the world. But we've also seen violence by some parties who support Palestine, who, for instance, in the case of the attack at the airport in Dagestan against when the plane that was from Tel Aviv, when it landed, and a crowd of people tried to attack those who they thought were coming from Israel. Could you give us your impression on how you view the groundswell of support for the Palestinian cause all over the world, from Australia to America to cities in Europe? It's very, very, very prevalent.
Thank you again. But again, you mentioned, again, back to October 7th, Gaza under the full military Israeli siege since 2007. Please be aware of that. This means I'm from Gaza. Unfortunately, since 2 days, I lost my communication with my family there. I did not have a I'm not pretty sure whether they are alive or not alive. This is very important, please. Again, when it came to the you mentioned strong Palestinian community in South Africa. That no, it's not a Palestinian community. Part of the Jewish people, distant Jewish people in the United States of America is supporting us, is fighting against us, is fighting with us. I mean, is fighting to popularize our cause there in America, so that it's not a Palestinian community, it's the humanity itself. Because today, the social media gave us the chance for the first time ever to deliver our message, and the people is decent all around the world. I used to meet with many Americans, and when I used to talk to them, I spent in America 8 years, then when I used to meet with them and to talk about our cause, then they completely used to be shocked, because the narrative, or how did they feed it since they born to feed it about the information that used to be fed about the Palestinian causes came from a complete biased media outlet. But regarding what is happening in Dagestan, I appeal to everyone. If you want to support the Palestinian cause, the just Palestinian cause, just raise your voice with your government, raise your voice in the street, but don't try to hit or to reach out to any innocent Jewish people. This is not a struggle against the Jewish people. This is not a fight. This is not an issue. We have no issue with the Jewish or the Judaism itself, so that, or the Israeli themselves. We in the Palestinian Liberation Organization already recognized the state of Israel 30 years ago, and we accepted to build our state in only 22% of our historical land. Again, this incident is an alarming incident. It should be alarming incident. You should not take it out of its social context or current historical.
Okay, Ambassador, for the humanitarian ceasefire to happen, what about the unconditional release of hostages of the Israelis, the Israeli hostages, 25 nationalities? They're not just Israelis. Do you think Hamas should release those hostages?
My question to you, do you know how many hostages in the Israeli jail today? How many Palestinian hostages in the Israeli jail today? Do you know how many kids of them or child of them? Do you know that more than 1,600 Palestinians was jailed and tortured, and there is a lot of pictures since the beginning of the last escalation? Do you know that our body, when someone did in the jail, they did not release his body? Don't you know that Israel have what's so called the number symbol, which means that we used to be killed, then put in the grave and without names. Anyone know how many hostages is Israeli hostage in the Israeli present? Anyone know that since 1967, more than approximately 715,000 Palestinians was jailed in the Israeli jail? And we used to, as a civilian, we used to trail before the military coup. No, you should, again. This is not the end of the history, and this is not the beginning of the history. We all should be very fair when we comparing. Today, approximately 6,500 Palestinians in the Israeli jail. Anyone remember?
Okay, Ambassador,
Anyone,
thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time.
Then we should just concentrate on the hostages in Gaza. And again, this is something also the American is trying to justify their war, their physical war against the Palestinians because there is some American citizen. Then why did you send them? I gotta mention 3 names of the American citizens whom you fighting against the Palestinian people. One of them conducted a massacre against the Palestinian people. Why you did not remember them? Then you remember that there is some American hostages in Gaza Strip. Why no one wants to remember Shireen Abu Akleh is your colleague. Excuse me, Shireen Abu Akleh is your colleague. She's a Christian, she's an American citizen, but no one wants to remember her. And they assassinated her.
We are aware of the prisoners that are Palestinian prisoners that are being held in Israeli prisons. I asked you that question concerning the situation now in Gaza and the Israel-Hamas war, whether for the humanitarian ceasefire to happen, whether it will be a good thing to release the Israeli hostages. But we'll leave it there. We hope to bring you on this program again at a later juncture. We thank you so much for being a part of the program. We thank you. We were speaking with His Excellency, Mr. Abdullah Shawesh, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, Embassy of the State of Palestine, who joined us virtually from Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for being a part of the program. And now, finally, activists occupy the office of Canada's Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, on Monday in Toronto, demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Footage showed protesters holding a placard reading, "Stop Genocide Now," and chanting "Free Palestine" in Freeland's office. Protesters in support of Palestine also gathered on the streets, holding banners, singing and chanting. That's it for today's coverage of Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching.